Scottie Pippen. I don't know why I took such an interest in Scottie Pippen.
I know.
I put out a rhetorical question on Twitter.
Yeah.
If you could put together starting five of any players of all time, what would you put? Who would you put? And Feltbot, who is a great follow on Twitter, and I've been reading him for a long time. He's a Warriors analyst. He put out basically the Warriors three, their trio, plus Pippen and Hakeem. And I thought it was such a bold thing to say in public. And I was just maybe think of like Scottie. No one would ever put Scottie Pippen in their starting five. So I was just digging into his whole. I mean, I watched him play, but I was just digging into his whole history, and his resume is actually really, really good for a guy that's basically known as like the best second option of all time. Like, I think that kind of undersells Scottie Pippen. Not to take anything away from Michael Jordan, which I did for a whole day yesterday on Twitter. Just Pippen for Pippen's sake. You could argue he's the best small forward ever. You could argue he's the best wing defender ever. You could argue he's the best two-way player ever. You could argue he's the most complete player ever. I mean, he's not the scorer Jordan was. He was not a guy who would give you 25 shots a game, but he would score efficiently on 18 shots a game, and he could do everything at an elite level, which I think is a pretty special player. But he's always like a footnote. He's always part of Jordan's story, is I guess what I'm trying to say. His story on his own is great.
It is a good story. Most complete player, I'll push back on that one because Jordan is a more complete player than Scottie Pippen. But if you're just specifically making it about a forward, small forward, yeah, you might have a case there. I
feel like they're kind of like the yin and the yang. They're similar. 166, 167. They're both great athletes. They both can jump out of the gym, but their approaches to basketball were probably the exact opposite. Jordan's approach is, I can't trust. He was drafted to a terrible team. I can't trust my teammates. Let me turn this into a one-on-one game. Let me take all the shots. Kind of like Wilt. And like, I don't think that's the best way to play basketball. You could argue it's what he had to do. But Scottie isn't that kind of player. Like, even on the 94 team where he was playing with B.J. Armstrong and Horace Grant, like, he didn't all of a sudden start taking 25 shots a game. That's not how he plays. He's going to use all of his teammates and make it a 5-on-5 game. And that's what Bill Russell did. And I think that's the best way to play basketball. And I think that's why the Bulls didn't start winning until Scottie got there. Because you can play like Michael Jordan and put up 37 a game in a season and also finish 40 and 42. We've seen it. Like, we saw Russell Westbrook average a triple-double 3 years in a row, but that doesn't make him the best player in the league. There's something about Scottie who could dominate a game without scoring a point that I find so intriguing. And I love players like that. You know, a guy who can literally go shoot 6 shots in a game and take over. Jordan wasn't that guy, although he probably could have been that guy. It's just not how he played basketball.
I think, Scottie is definitely a big part of Jordan's success, but I don't, no championships for Scottie without Jordan. Right?
Ditto for Jordan.
Yeah. I mean, Scottie's great, man. I think Jordan helped him a lot. Right, they won 3 championships in a row.
They were a good fit together, right? Because Scottie didn't want to be a volume shooter, so Jordan, hey, go ahead, take all the shots. No one's, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they won 3 finals in a row with Jordan. Jordan retired for like basically 2 years. They didn't win a championship. Came back, they won 3 championships in a row. So Scottie was great.
Yeah,
but
can we talk about that period though? Because I was been doing a lot of research on it. It's very interesting. So they win 3 in a row. Jordan retires. That last year, they won 57 games with Jordan. Jordan retires. They bring in Kukoc and Steve Kerr. Nice combo off the bench. They win 55 games. Pippen, 3rd in the MVP voting, number 1 voting in All-NBA first team that year, and All-Star MVP. So big coming out year for Pippen as the leader of that team. They win in the first round of the playoffs. They play the Knicks in the second round of the playoffs, losing 7. Knicks go on to the finals and losing 7 to the Rockets. So they were right there. And there's like a very controversial call at the end of Game 5 on Scottie Pippen. He was called for fouling a guy after the shot. Anyway, I'm not saying they got screwed, but some people say they got screwed. It was very close for them that year. It's not like they sucked. So then the next year they lose Horace Grant. They're not quite as good. Jordan comes back. They get eliminated by Shaq. They go out and get Rodman. All of a sudden they're off again. Rodman was a very important piece of that team. But that 94 team, what they accomplished without Jordan, no, I didn't even know what happened. I had no idea that Scottie Pippen and the Bulls did that until, because I was like 5, 6 at the time. I'm like, Damn, no one talks about this. Honestly, if Pippen had gone to the finals that year, if he hadn't got called for that foul, if they had somehow beaten the Rockets, which was feasible, what would his legacy be, and what would Jordan's legacy be? That's kind of interesting.
Would have been a lot different.
But we don't live in that world.
So that was a season that I probably watched 80% of the games that year. Like I remember, I'm 43 years, 35?
Mm-hmm.
30? Yeah. So I was 8 years.
I'm 35. Yeah. 35. Yeah.
So I was 8 years old. In 94, I was like a freshman or an eighth grader. So I was really into it, watching all that stuff.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, Scottie's legit, man. I'm not trying to take away from Scottie at all. I just, he's just
like you could argue he was the best player in the league that one year, 94. Him or Hakeem?
Hakeem. I would
Hakeem.
Go
Okay.
Was,
okay.
Man, Hakeem was.
Then you could argue he was the second best player in the league that year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Hakeem, like in my lifetime, Hakeem is right behind Shaq. And there's things that you could argue that he's better at than Shaq, right? Like you
could argue he's not the best player of all time.
Yeah.
If you want to be a real troll, you could really make the case that Hakeem Olajuwon is the greatest player of all time. I mean, he was on the Rockets were a pretty bad organization, but they always won with him on the team. I mean, he never played with he played with Clyde and won a championship with him, but he also won a championship on a team that had 0 All-Stars on it. Who the hell does that?
Yeah.
Who the hell does that? Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, Hakeem was phenomenal. He could also make a free throw, which puts him above Shaq in that.
He punked Shaq in the playoff in the finals. And Shaq was young, but Shaq was a man child. Like it's not like he was Shaq at 20 in 1995. He was averaging 29 and 13. I mean, he was a load.
Yeah.
It's not like he got better. I mean, maybe he did.
Yeah.
He got savvier.
Shaq was is an example of domination, physical domination. That's kind of what LeBron reminds me of, to be honest with you. That LeBron's kind of like Shaq in that regard because he's just physically dominant and athletic, and that's the main asset, his longevity and his physical dominance for LeBron James.
Also, I feel like he's the greatest driver of all time in the sense that he's basically built like Karl Malone, and he can drive right and left and finish right and left. He's so hard to keep out of the lane without a hand check. All of that. But also in his era, like there's like no Dikembe Mutombo, no David Robinson, no Hakeem, right? So like he lost twice to Duncan in the finals. Duncan's kind of that guy who could at least contest a shot at the rim. So part of it is that he got to just drive the hoop on wide open lanes his whole career. All that being said, I want to minimize what LeBron did. I was looking at his impact, like just impact on winning. He comes to a team, all of a sudden they improve by like 30 wins. He leaves a team, they lose by they get worse by like 40 wins. That's tangible. I don't really care what you want to say about a guy. That's tangible.
Here's the thing. LeBron is like a big monster, and he's fast, and he's athletic. Like the only guys
and he's unselfish.
Size-wise are like centers, but they can't move like that. So like he just dominates, man.
He's great. He might be the best power forward of all time. Although I think of him as a power forward. I guess that's why I would consider Scottie the best small forward of all time. You could say Durant was a better small forward than Scottie, but I'll take Scottie's defense over Durant's shooting. Again, like from a small forward to me, like you're supposed to be the best perimeter defender on the team. Like I think offense is a little secondary to defense when I think of the ideal platonic small forward. So Larry Bird, great offensive player. Durant, great offensive player. But I'll take the greatest wing defender ever, who also was a point forward, essentially. And could give you 22 points a night. Like that's what I want from a small forward right there.
Yeah, Scottie's legit, man. Like really no flaws in his game. He wasn't as like shifty as like he wasn't. Yeah. He's more Trey Lance than Brock Purdy. You know what I'm saying? Like he doesn't have the short area.
He wasn't like crossing people over off the dribble. No. Yeah. But he was a good ball handler. He could lead the break.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like Scottie, man.
Scottie. If you were going to rank the greatest players of the 90s, I think he's got to be top 5. You could argue he's top 3. You could argue it's him and Jordan and Hakeem as the 3 best players in the 90s.
That's tough, man. That's a really tough. I'd have to think about that more. Definitely at his position, he'd be up there for sure. Yeah,
he would. Yeah. I mean, you also got Karl Malone, but I feel like Karl Malone's a guy whose game would not translate to today's game. Scottie's would.
You know the most boring players that I remember, like the most boring players I've ever watched, but they're great. Karl Malone, super boring. Great player. Hall of Famer, hella boring. Tim Duncan,
Tim Duncan.
extremely boring. Really a phenomenal player, one of the best of all time. But their game is just so vanilla. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I love Tim Duncan's game. It was so fundamental. He was so great on defense. He's one of the greatest players of all time. I mean,
He is.
he's one of the.
Like watching.
How many big men were legitimately better than Tim Duncan all time? Hakeem, probably, because I feel like Hakeem could do everything Duncan could do at us, and he was a little bit bigger.
Duncan but in terms was essentially a forward, though, right? He's basically a power forward.
He's 6'11". I mean, in today's in today's NBA, where you play one big, I think of him as a center. Like, because in today's NBA, like every power forward has to shoot three. You can't be a power forward and not shoot threes today. So, I mean, I think
I look at him as a power forward. I look at him as top 2 or 3 power forwards of all time. I just didn't like watching him. Really boring.
I loved watching the Spurs. I loved watching Manu. I thought he was ahead of his time. He was a lot of fun. He could shoot.
I think Manu Ginobili is like has the highest winning percentage in NBA history, right? I always bring that up when people argued Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the best quarterbacks because he wins. Well, I'm like, well, Manu Ginobili has the highest winning percentage in NBA history. Does that mean he's the best? So interesting.
I liked Manu Ginobili was great. Oh, the other thing before I get off Scottie Pippen, this was all day yesterday, and then when I got deep down the rabbit hole, I started looking at Tony Kukoc. Tony Kukoc came to the Bulls at like 25, and apparently he was a legend younger, like when he was playing overseas. But man, like he was 6'10". He could shoot threes. He was like way ahead of his time. He had a step back three like Dirk. He had like a Euro step before Euro steps. Like that's a guy in today's NBA be shooting 10 threes a game starting. Like that guy was a lot of fun. Watch Tony Kukoc highlights. They're a lot of fun.
Big part of that dynasty.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's interesting. Like Jordan, volume shooting, really good. But you take him off the team and you replace him with some dead eye shooters and Kukoc and Kerr, all of a sudden you're still winning. You're still good. You're still good. Hey, there's a theory out there that the NBA didn't want Pippen to win that ring because it'd be tough on Jordan's legacy. Do you understand how much the NBA profited off of Jordan? This is the way I looked at it. The NBA was nothing in the 70s. Then they became a thing off the Bird Magic rivalry. That made them marquee. Then that was done. And it was time to go to the 90s, and it was Jordan, but there was no one to pit him against. Yeah. So the whole thing was Jordan's the greatest player of all time. Jordan's God on the basketball court. Let's all watch greatness. Let's all watch him add to his resume. So it was more about him than the Bulls. And when it got to the finals, the whole country was rooting for Jordan to be the best. And it was like, screw the Sonics, or screw these. It was all about Jordan's legacy. And I feel like the league profited off of that. It was in their interest for Jordan to win.
They profit off all the superstars, but here's the thing, you take away all the teammates, you take away all the championships, everything, and you just watch the player play basketball. He's the greatest of all time. Greatest of all time.
One-on-one? I would have to say so. One-on-one. I mean, what he would do, I can see it. Although, Kevin Durant's who would win one-on-one? Kevin Durant against Michael Jordan.
In their primes, I'm going Jordan because of defense.
I mean, it's just hard to. But yeah, one-on-one. That's my point, I guess. The greatest one-on-one player of all time, probably Jordan. But
that's what makes him the GOAT.
All of his one-on-one greatness didn't lead to team success. Scottie Pippen always had team success, even though he was not a great one-on-one offensive player. The greatest one-on-one. Who've been fun. Here's another thing about Jordan that was lucky for him in the 90s. He didn't have to play against Scottie Pippen. The one guy in the NBA who might have been able to hold him in check was on his freaking team, guarding Magic Johnson in the finals, and then freaking Charles Barkley the next year. So that was fortuitous. And the one time he would have faced Hakeem in the finals, he was playing, he lost to Shaq, and then he didn't make it. Or he was playing basketball.
You just said, though, the best one-on-one player of all time is Michael Jordan. And to me, that makes you the greatest player of all time.
See, that's, I think, the crux of the argument. Right now, we found it. To me, it's a 5-on-5 game. And that's why Bill Russell has a legit argument to be the GOAT. Because no, he wasn't as good as a one-on-one player as maybe Wilt, but he beat Wilt every freaking time. And there's a reason for that. And it wasn't just he was on a better team than Wilt. He made the team
of all time.
Defense. So anyway, but you can have this argument for till the end of time. It's fun to engage in, but only in May and June. In July, it's over. In August is football time.